Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, I get pretty excited about doing all these shows. I really enjoy doing this and talking to really interesting people. But I'm a little more pumped up today because I get to talk about three things that I really love. One is hockey, another is tough guys, and the third one is redemption. I'm a real sucker for a comeback story. I just love hearing from people who have been, into the depths of despair, into the dungeons of life, and have come back and lived to tell the tale. I alone live to tell thee, like at the opening of Moby Dick. So on the hockey front, we have a wonderful guest today. He's going to be able to talk about all three of these things. He knows a lot about hockey. He lived a life in hockey. He was one of the toughest guys ever in the NHL. And he's got a great story of redemption to tell, in which he has chronicled in his book called Painkiller. His name is Brantt Myhres. Before we get to him, as we always do, we're going to go to the aphorism board. But before we go there today, I have a special treat. Those of you who are not totally convinced that I'm a complete nerd, I'm going to show you a couple things from my collection. I have here, can you see this? Maybe not. This is a Wayne Gretzky rookie card. Can you guys see that? Okay, and I also have one. This is Bobby Orr from 1974. I don't know if you guys can see that. There it is. Okay, so let's go to the aphorism board. The first one is from a person whom I do not particularly admire, but this is a great quotation and very applicable to what we're going to be talking about today with our guest. And it is this: addiction is when you can't get enough of what you don't want anymore. That's from Deepak Chopra. The second one is from a very famous British author, whom I do admire very much, Aldous Huxley, who once wrote, "Experience is not what happens to you, it is what you do with what happens to you." And finally, the next one is from an American author and poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who famously wrote, "The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be," which is kind of the point of today's episode. So who do we have on the show? Well, we have Brantt Myhres. Those of you who have read the book or listened to it know that he was known to his teammates and friends as Mysie. Without upsetting him, I'm going to ask him if he's going to let me call him that today. He's a former Canadian professional ice hockey player. He was drafted by the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 5th round, 97th overall, in the 1992 NHL Entry Draft. He has a great story about that day and leading up to the draft that's in the book. He played for the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Philadelphia Flyers, San Jose Sharks, Nashville Predators, Washington Capitals, and the Boston Bruins. He was notably suspended 4 times by the NHL for failing drug tests and was eventually banned from the league for life. However, as we're going to hear about, after becoming clean and sober and studying substance abuse, behavioral health at Mount Royal University in Calgary, he was hired by the Los Angeles Kings in September of 2015 and became the team's player assistance director, of really a new position that was developed there through his own efforts, his own unique story, and his history with the coach, Daryl Sutter, and their general manager, Dean Lombardi. And all of this is, as I say, is explained in the book and is a really fascinating story. And most recently, Brantt has written an incredible book that I listened to, and it's called Painkiller, and I recommend to anyone. Actually, I normally tell people to buy books and read. I encourage reading. But in this particular case, it's one of those books, and I would include 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson's book. Sometimes when a book is narrated by the author, it's just incredibly compelling. And I found listening to this book, which is narrated by the author, first of all, it's just a beautifully written book. It's very well organized. beautifully written. And when Brantt tells it himself, it's so compelling and so personal that I just would strongly recommend. In fact, do both. Buy the book and get the audio version, because the audio version, I just honestly, I've listened to it. I listened to it 3 times, especially the last chapter. Some of the chapters, Brantt will understand why, are really hard to listen to, because it was really tough to listen to the level of really self-destruction that's in there. Anyway, Brantt, can I call you Mizey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Listen to it 3 times. If you listen to it 3 times, you can call me Mizey.
All right, I got the hat trick.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited to have you on the program. I want to talk to you first of all. Maybe you could talk a little bit about going back into your own personal history. I know this is talked about a little bit in the book, just to kind of set it up, but really how you fell in love with hockey, and kind of where you're from. I know we share a background in Cold Lake. Brandt's from Cold Lake. I've lived here for over 20 years now. But could you talk a little bit about your childhood and your background and how you fell in love with hockey and became a hockey player?
Yeah, it's funny, I don't remember. I just remember, I think we started out the second story in the book about when I was 5 years old, and me and my sister Cher were watching, I think it was Puff the Magic Dragon, and my mom was making pizza. And I remember it was really cold. There was lots of snow. That's sort of what I remember. And then the next thing I remember walking in the snow and with my hockey bag over my shoulder. And then the next memory would be I would use the boards to hold myself up or to smash into because I couldn't stop. And that was probably my earliest memory of just wanting to be on the ice. And then I believe it would have been when we moved back from Swan Hills to Grand Center. And I just remember playing road hockey a lot back when the kids would actually play road hockey. And
I did.
Yeah. And so I just had a love for it. I remember watching it on TV. I remember when, believe it or not, when Steve Smith scored the goal against Grand Fear, I remember I was in my room and I had a radio. I was literally listening to the game at 10. And I think that when you have children that are that young, that go to those types of lengths, you realize that there's something in you that is special when it comes to the love of a sport. And I found that early on.
It's funny you mentioned that story about Steve Smith, because I think I might have mentioned to you when we talked on the phone. Grant Fuhr is a good friend of mine. In fact, he was, for many years, he was my brother-in-law. I got to hang out with him, and I remember the Steve Smith story as well. It won't surprise you to hear this, but I think it would surprise a lot of hockey fans that neither Grant nor any other player on that team blames Steve Smith for that play. In fact, Grant blames himself. Which is kind of an interesting. I mean, you'll understand that because you're a hockey player, but people who have not been inside a hockey dressing room probably won't appreciate that.
Yeah.
But Grant's an interesting connection too, because as you know, not to the same degree as you, but he had a very high-profile issue with the NHL's substance abuse program as well, and also someone who overcame some deep personal troubles and came back and was very successful in the NHL. So that's an interesting link there. You were an excellent player, and this is chronicled in the book. And I know some of your, let's say, some of your contemporaries. I've talked with them. You were an outstanding player as a young hockey player before you went to the Western Hockey League. You were very talented and scored a lot of goals. And you talk about this in the book. Even though you sort of made your name in the game, as it were, as a fighter, that isn't what you originally set out to do, was it?
No, well, the other thing too was that, like, if you notice I think it was my last year junior, I had, I think it was around 63 points in
Hmm.
16 games, 20 goals, and I think close to 250 minutes and penalties. Um, but so back then, what was great about junior is that, my last year, there was nobody left to fight. And I got a lot of room, and that room enabled me to play on the power play, and so I was on the first line, my last year junior and my second last year junior too.
Hmm.
So I actually got to show what I was doing back in midget hockey,
Hmm.
and then when I went to pro is a completely different animal. Um, Now it's a strategic game that they have going on there, and it felt like no matter how good of a night I had, like for instance, we played the Rangers in New York, and I scored a goal. I had a couple fights, um, and I was a second star of the game, and I think maybe the next night I might have only had 2 minutes on the ice, or maybe 3 minutes, or something like that. So it's a completely different beast. But yeah, no, I enjoyed when I got out on the. My favorite nights were when no tough guys were playing, because I didn't have to worry about who was going to come tap me on the shoulder, and
Hmm.
you just went out and played and had fun.
You had a lot of things that were troubling you off the ice, and you go into great detail with them, and with incredible, just brutal honesty. There's just a naked honesty about this book, which is very gripping, I have to say. And I mean, it really speaks to who you are and why you wrote the book. But did you find that being on the ice and playing hockey was kind of a sanctuary for you? It was a break from that, or did you find that because of the role that you had as a hockey player, that really you weren't enjoying being on the ice all that much?
Um, Interesting question. I think there's a bit of cake batter in answering that.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, the feeling that I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie my whole life, I think, and the feeling that you would get um, if you fought in front of 19,000 people, it's hard to explain.
Mm-hmm.
But then, what would you do with that adrenaline after? And my reward system was, okay, I'm gonna have to battle through this fight, or maybe two fights tonight, but I know the golden goose at 11 o'clock, and this is where I'm going. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it was the carrot that was dangling of the lifestyle that led with being an NHL player and making money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was, when I got sober and I was trying to play the game sober, it was way harder for me because I had no reward system anymore.
Yeah.
And I just go home and sit there, and it was tough.
You actually stated in the book that you said you stated in the book at one point that you couldn't do that role sober. That
Yeah,
it wasn't in your nature to do that role, right? Is that what you're trying?
no, not not at all. I mean, I think the desire to play in the NHL was so strong for me. I dreamt about it since I was a little kid, and I looked at people like, I know Grant would know this video. It was called "Boys on the Bus,"
Oh yes.
and it's funny. I love that video so much. I watched it the other night again, and I've
Hmm.
seen it. I mean, I've seen that thing 500 times. Uh, so the Oilers to me, including Grant, were like gods.
Hmm.
And I think probably for me, I've had a lot of like really cool moments from the book release, especially the hundreds and hundreds of people that have reached out, and that really warmed my heart. But for me, one of the coolest things was I was sitting there one day, and I got a message from the trainer from the Oilers back in the 80s. And he said, "Hey, Brandt," he said, "Glenn Sather wants you to call him." And I'm like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, he wants you to give him a call." So I call Slats up, and he just really commended me on the book, and he loved what he read, and it was, for me, that was almost like Gretzky calling me and
Hmm.
saying, "Awesome job." It was just sort of felt surreal. So that was a really cool moment.
That must have felt especially nice after there is a story, as you know, about you and Mr. Sather in the book and your
Yeah, yeah.
brief stint with the Oilers. So that must have been a nice way to close the loop. Uh,
Yeah.
talking about the Oilers, one of the things that is talked about inferentially in your book, but I think is also an intoxicating feature of being an NHL tough guy is um, the role of the tough guy in the NHL or a policeman or wherever you want to call it is an exalted position in the dressing room. I don't think people really understand this, but I know, for example, Grant talked to me about this. Maybe the most beloved person in the dressing room was Dave Semenko,
Hmm.
um, and that's an intoxicating part of being in that protector role too, isn't it? That you are the guy, and really you're a beloved member on the team. And people who aren't around the game maybe don't understand this as much, but the players in the room too, man, they just adore Dave Stemenko and those other guys. Was that part of the intoxication for you? Sort of that you were an important player in that respect because you were looking after everybody on your teams.
Yeah, and you know what? When I dove into it, I think a little bit more. I think the reality is that I wasn't able to protect my mom or
Uh,
my sister from, or my brother from, or myself from the
mhm,
physical abuse.
mhm.
And there was a part of me that always wanted to protect. And I think that once I got that feeling of protecting somebody, you don't want to let them down. And
Mhm.
I think that really drove me a lot when players would take liberties with our guys. It really fired me up, and I think that I was known for a guy that, no matter if I didn't even like the guy, that I was going to be there for him.
There was a great movie, a critically acclaimed movie you probably saw a number of years ago called American Sniper.
Yeah.
And he talks in that book about the protective gene. And I thought of that when I was listening to your book, that you sort of had that too, didn't you? That's something that you can't put there. And you it's there for it was there with you for a reason because of the very tumultuous childhood that you had. You might want, I
Mhm.
don't know if you want to delve into that. Obviously, it's talked about a lot in the book, but is that kind of what caused you to have this protective gene, or do you think that was always there in your character?
Well, I think that being helpless as a 5 or 6 year old, you don't, you're unable to perform that duty. And once I got older and bigger and stronger, and I saw how, what really makes you feel good is when you're done the fight and you're in the penalty box. Any tough guy will know this. When the penalty's over and you skate out and you have all 23 guys on the bench standing up, like it's amazing. You
Yeah.
know, they're all patting you on the back, and between the period, the coach comes in and singles you out and says, "Way to get the boys going, Mizey, and excellent job." So it never went unnoticed, and I think that in today's game, especially, I would say in the last, well, what year is it? 2022. So probably a good decade,
Hmm.
maybe 8 years. It's really the league has lost that.
Yes. And I would say, of course, I'm showing my age here, and I was a hockey player, and at certain times, certainly not at the level that you were, but I was called upon to protect other players too. Um, and I wanted to ask you about this, Brant, because now I watch a lot of junior hockey now because I'm involved with the Thunder and the Alberta Junior League. And what I notice is that when there's tension in the game, you know what I'm talking about, and it starts out at the start of the game. There doesn't seem it's like steam, and there isn't a release, and that sort of it stays there and it percolates throughout the game, and it really ruins the flow of the game. and the sticks come up, and it's a penalty-filled game. And back in your era, it seems to me what used to happen was guys like you would let all the steam out, and then everybody could kind of settle down and play hockey. And to me, that serves kind of an important function in the game of hockey, and it's been lost. Would you agree with that, or am I overstating the case?
No, I would agree with it. I think that if you look back when I played in the mid to late 90s, that every team had probably, I would say, including defensemen and forward, probably 6 guys or 7 guys like Zach Kassian.
Right.
Not necessarily killers, but they'd be there for the boys. And you'd have your 2 heavyweights that would usually be in the lineup. And so everybody sort of like protected each other in a way. And now it's the way the game's not policed by us anymore. It's policed by Gary Bettman and the referees.
Yeah.
And whatever the TV contracts may want to roll out. So I get it in a way. It doesn't mean that I have to like it. Like, do I still like watching hockey? Yeah, absolutely. I think these guys are incredible, how good they are. But you got to remember, when I played, there was incredible players back then too.
Oh yeah.
Joe Sakic, Steve Yzerman, Rob Blake. You can go down the list. Bure, Fedorov. I mean, it just went on and on with incredible players. I got over 100 points a year. So believe me, there was just as good of players back then than there is now.
You certainly, though, talking about great players, you certainly picked let's call it the grand era of tough guys too. I mean, there were never in any period in hockey I can think of bigger, badder hombres than the guys who populated the NHL when you were there. Oh my goodness. I met George Laraque. I skated against George Laraque in a charity game, and I mean, he is one large human being. The fact that you tangled with him, oh my goodness, you have the courage of angels.
Well, when I broke in too, it felt like most of the tough guys were like Bob Probert size, like 6'4", 225, and then you had McSorley that was 230 or 235. You had Stu Grimson, you had Donald Brashear, you had Tony Twist. It just went on and on, and they were monsters back then. And then a little bit of a new breed came in, which was George Laraque, Derek Bugard.
Yes.
6'7"
of them, I think.
6'7". You had a couple different killers that were playing, and they were monsters. I mean, George, to me, when I fought George, like especially the second fight, like it was almost like he was fighting in kindergarten, and I was the kindergarten. He was so strong that it was over empowering, and the same thing with Brashear. Those were really the 2 guys that I only had problems with, but they were jacked, and they were big boys.
Everybody else had problems with them too.
Yeah.
But I want to come back and talk about kind of the point of the book. It's a great hockey book, and we've talked about the hockey story. There's a lot of beautiful hockey in there about you getting drafted and your love of the game and your time in junior and your relationship with your dad. But it's also a story about addiction. And so what was really fascinating to me is that you didn't really develop any type of addiction problem when you were a young kid. You kind of fell into it after you left home and went to junior hockey. And in fact, you talk about this in the book. You, as a young kid, you had that NHL dream, and you were very focused on living clean. Like you never touched a beer or anything. And then when you got exposed to alcohol, it was like, where have you been all my life? Do you want to talk about that, about how that's
I hated the taste of alcohol. My grandparents would drink every night, and they'd come home from I don't know, do you remember that store, McLeod's?
Oh yes.
Yeah. So they owned the McLeod store, and they'd come home every night. They'd have this bottle of rum, and they'd pour 1 or 2 drinks, and it was and I'd be smelling it at about 10 or 11 or 12, and it made me sick. I just couldn't stand the smell of alcohol. And even at 16 in Portland, I'd go to these team parties, and I'd have a beer, but I'd dump it out just so that I'd look like I was drinking. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Lethbridge, that's when everything changed, and I got introduced to the country bar there, and you could have these whiskey and cokes for like, I think 75 cents back then.
Oh my goodness!
And we didn't make a lot of money, so I instantly fell in love with the taste of alcohol for some reason at that age. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, it was obviously excessive.
Mm-hmm. One of the wonderful things about the book, just as an aside for me, are the references to Cold Lake. For example, in the book, you talk about the bar Thumpers, which is a place that I knew, and you even talk about Judge Fraser, who's I appeared in front of probably thousands of times. And so when you tell that story, it was very vivid. I could just see it all being played out. So that was really cool for me in reading and listening to your book.
Yeah, Judge Fraser, he pretty much saved my junior career, because at that point I got charged with theft, and he just said to me, you know that I can squash this whole border crossing thing. Hey, he saw the look on my face, so he gave me community service, and I went and picked up garbage and mowed grass. But I never forget him, and I saw him in a bar. I saw him at do you remember Rondell's?
Oh yes. Yeah.
So I saw him at Rondell's. It would have been 15 years later, and it was for Canada Day, and he was sitting there having a beer, and I just said, "Do you mind if I sit down?" And he said, "No." He said, "How you been?" He goes, he goes, "Yeah, I still remember that." I'm like, "Yup, thanks."
Well, you probably realize this. He was no soft touch. He was known for being,
Was he?
Oh yeah, no, he could really thunder from the bench. But a lot of people, I knew him. I got to know him a little better than some, and he has a good heart. He suffered some tragedy in his own life some years later, and sadly, he lost his son to cancer. So tragedy comes to, unfortunately, to all of us. But I'm not surprised that he would remember you. He had a prodigious memory back in the day. But Brett, your real nemesis, alcohol was part of it, but the real challenge that you faced, the real nemesis that you faced, was cocaine, wasn't it? How did you get started on cocaine? Was it in Lethbridge that you got started using cocaine?
No, I was attending a thing called Peach Fest, which was in Penticton.
Oh, right. I remember this part of the book now. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And a friend of mine, let's call him Dog. He brought me in, and he said, "Hey, roll this up and don't ask any questions, because it's going to feel real good." And I just remember walking out of the bathroom, and it was like I was walking into a completely different world. Mm-hmm. And I was hooked from that moment on, pretty much. I tried to say, "Oh, I'll never buy it. I'll just use it if somebody has it." But when I got to Philly is when I got hooked up with a drug dealer there. Mm-hmm. So it was often.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I identified, there's a lot of things about your book that I identified with personally, not just the hockey and stuff like that, but people know, because I've talked about it on the show, I've my own history of depression. Mm-hmm. And so I understand what that's like, to sort of have a space inside yourself that you need to fill up with, something. Mm-hmm. And so, I do understand why, you had this sort of, let's call it compulsion towards self-destruction. But oh my goodness, Myhres, there were parts of this book Well, actually, there's I found a CBC quote. A reviewer did a review of your book. He put it perfectly. He said this: "If the NHL had an award for most self-destructive player, the Brantt Myhres Cup would arrive brimming with Jack Daniels and cocaine." Like some of these parts of the book are so hard to read. The one that honestly, the one that I was thinking of is when you went to rehab and you worked so hard and you had this interview the next night at the Westin Hotel.
Yeah, that's
hook up with your friend. I was going. I had to stop. I had to stop the book. It was like, no, don't do it.
Yeah, that is. Well, they talk about the definition of insanity, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that was I was fully insane. To even though if you want to say it worked, like I got away with it that day, I ended up getting caught relatively soon after that. Mm-hmm. But for me to do that with the doctor down the aisle or the hallway and show up high on cocaine, and that's my meeting to get reinstated back into the league.
Incredible.
I mean, I don't know, even some of the stuff that I in the book, that even if I go over it, it's tough for me at this point in my life to think that I actually did that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it happened.
And then sort of the impression that comes through very clearly in the book is, you achieve something that a lot of people don't get to do, and that is you got to live a dream, a boyhood dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, there's this other subplot where you set out to destroy the dream that you've made. And of course, that I had the impression from reading the book that was part of what fueled the abuse. That you were beating yourself up because you realized that you were destroying yourself and your dream that you'd worked so hard for. Is that an accurate depiction, or am I misreading it?
No, it's pretty accurate. The self-destruction, you don't listen, if you don't understand what type of disease you're suffering from, people can sort of chat with you about it. But I think it was in my last rehab in 2008 that I went to, that I sort of really paid attention and studied what was going on in the brain and the reasons for the self-destruction and the behavior that I was showing. And I got to understand that I was sick, and I wasn't taking really any medicine. The Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that I was going to was strictly based on force, or I'd lose my job. So did they really mean anything to me? No, not at all. Not at all. I went to get my card signed and to keep a contract, but it wasn't until I got out of the game. And here's the other thing too, like I talk about it, I think that if I had a hockey player, like let's say Bob Probert was retired when I was playing, and Proby wanted to work with me and be a friend of mine and guide me, and that for sure would have went so far. But when I played, there was nobody. Like there was nobody that I could talk to about it, or I thought I was going to lose $500,000-$600,000. So it was tough back then.
There are a couple of really great Bob Probert stories in the book, but I think it's fair to say he wasn't the greatest influence.
Yeah.
The story about the leased motorcycle and running around with those guys from the Blackhawks. Oh my goodness.
Well, you're a lawyer, and can you imagine in I think that would have been 99, maybe 98.
Mm-hmm.
Getting pulled over on a Harley at 3 a.m. with no helmet, okay, blood all over your shirt, no motorcycle license, and hammered, and they know all four. Mm-hmm. They know all four, and they let me go. And then I hide under a truck, and I wait for them to leave, and then I get back on the Harley, and I'm gone. It just, yeah. Crazy.
It's it's great that you can laugh about it. But coming back to what you were talking about, Brent, about doing some learning about the brain. We had a gentleman on the show previously. His name is Andrew Party, and he's a former collegiate athlete. He's a very high level volleyball player, but now he's a psychologist, and he counsels many elite athletes. And he actually works with high level hockey players, some NHL players, and he does something called psychometric testing. You probably know what that is, just to find out, what is the brain doing? What are guys thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was very shocking, and it probably won't shock you, what was shocking to me is based on some of the testing that he had done, NHL players test surprisingly low for confidence and very high in anxiety.
Mm.
Does that surprise you, or does that fit the picture?
The anxiety part, quite honestly, a true story, I had no idea what anxiety was until I turned 40 years old and I got back from Las Vegas, and I had this panic attack. I thought I was dying. I didn't know what was going on. And I was at a poker game with 10 guys and I'm laying on the floor. And I said, call an ambulance. And they were laughing. They didn't know. I go, no, there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't breathe. It was literally the scariest moment of my life. And so I'm 48 now. And ever since that day on March 29th of 2014, it's gotten a little better, but it's been sometimes really, really hard to just hang on, because when you feel sick in the brain and in the head, for me, I don't know if it's going to get worse. Like sometimes I'm at the point where I don't know. I'm like, okay, hang on. You're going to be okay, because I know it's sort of bad. And then usually when I go to sleep and I wake up, I feel good. So I shut the brain off. But yeah, I didn't know what anxiety was. I could stand out fight in front of, like I said, thousands of people. And I was nervous, but I didn't know what anxiety was. Like now anxiety is, for me, my head starts to feel heavy and my forearm will get a numb. My left forearm gets numb. And so that's a sign of I'm feeling off, and it's the scariest thing I've been through.
Did you feel anxiety while you were playing? I know in the book you talked about maybe some sleepless nights when you knew, for example, you had to tangle with a real heavyweight. Like you talk about that very late in your career, after you were through the substance abuse program, and you knew you had to step up and fight Big George the Rock, and you had a lot of anxiety there. Was that a different type of anxiety, or was it always
totally?
Yeah.
So that type of anxiety or stress or pressure was more consumed thoughts, massive heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This stuff that I'm going through is heaviness on the brain, heaviness in the head. Like I said, certain, parts will be numb. And, I tried Ativan after they took me to the hospital. And the shitty thing is that it worked.
Here we go. Next one, right?
It did. This little white pill, made me feel normal. And
I know what you mean. I had it. I tried the Ativan. Oh yeah.
And I took it for a couple months, and I said to myself, I just, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. I got to fight this head on. And I weaned myself off of Ativan, and it was the worst come down, or the worst weaning off I've ever experienced in my life. It was horrible. And I thought, wow, how powerful is that little pill to be able to do that to you, And I haven't touched one in 8 years. But I find for me too, people, when I go to the gym or I go for a run or I have a hard workout, and I'm sleeping well, that's my depression killer,
Mm.
hands down. I have a
Mhm.
great day. When I don't go to the gym, I eat like shit. It's coming back,
Yeah.
So
I
it's
exactly. I feel exactly. I'm exactly the same way.
yeah.
I know totally what you mean. One of the pieces of the CBC article I looked at was there's a professor named Laurie DeGrace who was talking about some of the anxiety that's in sport, though, and she theorizes that for team sports, the kids now seem to start drinking using marijuana as a team activity. Um,
Mhm.
are you seeing that in your work as a as a counselor, or did you find that that was more true? For example, when you went back, and maybe you could talk about this a little bit. When you went back and re-entered the NHL, which is a great redemption story, that's a beautiful part of the book. When you finally make it back to the NHL, I'm going yes.
Yeah.
And but you were there for a very specific reason because they had a group of players at, there and really good players
Mhm.
who were really struggling with addictions. So
Mhm.
when you went back into that dressing room, were you surprised to find that so many players were still struggling with addiction?
Not at all.
No.
I I don't think that. Quite honestly, if they said that half of their players were struggling, it wouldn't phase me. I mean, it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people are going to experience some type of addiction in their life. You know,
Mhm,
um, 3 out of 5 people are going to experience somebody that they know of that's struggling with
mhm.
addiction in some form. Um, Especially when money's not an issue. I mean, could you imagine if everybody was rich or drugs were legal? Who knows where that would go?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, it didn't surprise me. I think now that it's just such a scary time to be even a sporadic user. Like you don't know if that joint that you get is going to be laced with anything. They may say they're giving you ecstasy, but it could be laced with fentanyl. We all know the top killer right now, and I believe in Canada is fentanyl
Mhm.
overdoses. Um,
They've
so
got the
it's
rainbow ones now, the ones that look like candy.
Oh yeah, and the vape pens that are I think you can smoke marijuana oil in them now. Um, some places it's too accessible for me personally. I have a daughter that's 14 and a half, and she will not be doing any drugs in my home. I'll tell you that. Until she can, if you want to do drugs, you got to get your own job. You got to, make about 5 grand a month. You can do that. And you can go smoke all the weed you want, but you're not going to do it at my house.
Mhm.
And that's just the way that I feel about it.
I'm glad you brought up your daughter because one of the themes in the book are your personal relationships. There's of course there's a really terrible and horrific one with your stepfather. There's the one with your own father. Of course, there's your grandparents. There's your mother, of course,
Mm.
and then two very serious romantic relationships that you had. But the one that sort of rises above all of those and becomes the most important relationship in your life, and really kind of the redemption of
Mm.
Brantt Myhres is Chloe, your daughter. And
Mhm.
there's a scene in the book where there's a line I'll never forget. They said, "If you don't get on that plane, she won't have a daddy," and they were right. So how was your daughter so important in your recovery and in changing your life? And finally, after all the ups and downs and different, 4 times through the NHL addiction program, basically the pioneer for the Gary Bettman system. But it was your daughter that really was the key to your redemption, wasn't it? Or wasn't she, I should say?
Oh, Chloe had a major part in that. I mean, I got sober a week before she was born, so for me it was I think imperative that she got to experience a sober father, one that was, um, I again, I experienced it with with my stepdad, and I just didn't want to do that ever again with Chloe, and
Hmm.
that was going to take some determination and dedication on a daily basis, and I don't know if Peanut understands now quite the significance of that, and I don't expect her to. I imagine one day when she's older, though, she will, and she'll understand um, what her father went through, and so yeah, Chloe was a huge part in my journey to sobriety.
So again, coming back to this great latter part of the book, when you make it back to the NHL and you really were a pioneer developing this new program. And one of the most fascinating parts of listening to that part of the book was here you'd spent your whole life in a dressing room, and you're trying to figure out how to fit in to a dressing room again, where the guys wouldn't even call you by your nickname, right? Uh, and that was a really interesting journey for you, and being accepted and back in the dressing room, and
Yeah,
the role, obviously, the mentorship role that Daryl Sutter played in your life
yeah.
comes through really loud and clear. But here's my question for you, Brent. I mean, you've done a lot of different things in your life. You've been very involved in a lot of youth hockey programs and things like that in recent years. But talking about the NHL, you said you would not be surprised if half the players in an NHL dressing room have addictions problems. So this is 20, 25 years on since you were going through this. Why is that not getting better? Why is there still such a serious addictions problem going on in professional sports, or is that your perception? Is that true?
Well, I don't know if it's 50%. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think it is. I just wouldn't be surprised if somebody said it was.
Right.
Uh, Now, I don't know. I think that um, again, as I mentioned about Bob Probert and the support system that you would put in place, and then um, I I still don't really understand it. I don't own hockey teams, and I'm not the general manager, but that one sort of is interesting that they'll spend millions of dollars on coaching staff and obviously chefs for eating and bring in mental health awareness, but there isn't necessarily a role like mine other than Brian McGrattan in Calgary.
Hmm.
So there's 30, 31 or 32 teams left out there. So it's always been the last 4 years has been an interesting. Hey, like I've always wondered why the call hasn't come.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, if the call never comes, I got to experience a beautiful part in my life that I thought I'd never get to experience, and that's what I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, and that's why it's such a beautiful part of the book, because when you finally get back there, even though you're not a player, you actually got to experience it, because you weren't drunk and high all the time. You actually appreciated. You were great. There's a gratitude that comes through in that part of the book.
Yeah,
The NHL, I never heard the NHL referred to as the Never Hungry League before. Uh,
yeah,
the buffets are pretty good. But talking about that though, and again, there's a lot of really great things about this book. It's really one of my favorite hockey books I've ever read, and I've read a lot of hockey books. Going
thanks.
all the way back to Bobby Hull Hockey is my game when I was a kid.
Yeah,
But there's some really subtle threads that run through the book. For example, one of the biggest stories over the last 20 years in the NHL has been concussions and post-concussion syndrome. And there's a really interesting subplot in the book about you and your friendship with Eric Lindros and how that unfolded. And that gave a really great insight into what was going on with him and concussions and the way the NHL was approaching that at the time. Even though I don't think many people realize now who weren't watching the game back then what a huge player he was. I mean, he
yeah.
was at that time, he was the Connor McDavid of the NHL.
Oh,
And it was shocking to me to read that the NHL would be so disinterested in his health. What you describe in there is a really fascinating look at what was going on, and it kind of speaks to how they're spending money, where they're focusing resources, and it doesn't seem to be focused on the health of the players. I know you don't want to be critical of the league, but I have to say, based on what you've reported in your book, and I assume it to be perfectly honest, wow, it certainly asks the question, what is the NHL doing to look after the health of their players?
Well, it's, again, since me and Big E retired, I think the league's, if you look at the concussion protocol, it's way different than when we played. Like, I could get knocked out in a fight, go spend 5 minutes in the box and be concussed and come out and do it 2 more times. How you feeling? Yeah, I'm feeling fine. But Eric did some great things on his own. Like, I believe he donated $5 million or $8 million or something like that to research and development.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to see. He's, what I was always happy to see is that how good he's doing today. And it feels like, or it seems like he's managing and doing well as a father and a husband, and so that's awesome. But yeah, back in, you'll see the next decade will be different than this decade.
Yeah.
It's the evolution of the game. It's the evolution of insurance companies and sponsorship. Will have a big part to play in that. Like, when I watch a hockey game today, sometimes I have to see if I'm watching a Western Hockey League game or I'm watching the National Hockey League game, because everybody's wearing visors. Right. That wasn't the NHL to me. When I got to the NHL, it was take your helmet off for warm up, and then the skilled guys, would wear a visor, which is fine. When you talk about skilled guys wearing visors, the 2 best players to ever play the game didn't wear one. Actually, 3 if you want to include Messier in there. Yeah. Right. So anyways, all I'm saying is that the evolution of the game has changed a lot, and in the next decade, it's going to change a lot as well. Do you think it's
moving in the right direction?
Well, no, not for me. No, not for a hockey fan, a guy that played in the 90s. Of course, I miss that. I miss that game. But it's 2022. I've been retired for 18 years, and boy, do I appreciate how incredibly fast and skilled these guys are. That's not what I'm saying. I think the game of hockey is incredible right now, but it just, again, the evolution of it was something that I wish we had a little bit more of the old school. Let's just put it that way.
Yes, and especially in terms of rivalries. That's one thing that I miss about the old, the Smythe division and the
Norris.
Yes. But turning away from hockey, I want to talk a little bit about, before I let you go, we've kept you for a while here. I want to talk to you about writing, because you're obviously, to listen to you, you're very intelligent, you're very articulate, but you're not someone who spent a lot of time in school. In fact, you left school to go off and play hockey. And yet you've written just a beautiful book. Like, it's very well written. How did you get started and get interested in writing?
Well, I've as everyone knows, people have editors. So my editor was Nick Garrison from Penguin. What an amazing man. He, when I sent the manuscript to him, he spent so much time with me. People don't realize what goes into writing a book. Like, it's not like 2 weeks.
Right.
It took like 2 years. And Nick would say, maybe we should put, paragraph here, or he was the one that suggested that we start the book with the Harley story. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
and I'm like, come on, man, like that's the best story. He's like, yeah, well, we got to get him hooked right away.
Oh
So,
yeah. There's
uh,
nobody who will put the book down after that one. No.
so he was great. But the writing, I just opened up my MacBook. I had a whole bunch of um, um, journal stuff that I've written over the years, and I just looked at it and I said, okay, how am I going to start this? And then I said, well, I want to tell a movie. So I want to basically I want to write it as somebody sitting down with a big thing of popcorn and they're getting ready to watch a movie. And how am I going to do that? So I wrote it like that, like you were watching a movie, and it seemed to work
And
out.
that is exactly how it reads. But I tell you what, I can't figure out what kind of movie it is, because at certain times it's a comedy, other times it's a thriller, other times it's a horror show, sometimes it's a melodrama, but ultimately it's a comeback story. It's a
Yeah,
comeback story. It's a
yeah,
story of redemption, and
yeah.
that's what I really love about it. But I'm curious. I mean, there's a lot of really, really deeply personal stuff in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find at times it was hard to kind of get this out, that you really had to, it was sort of like, scraping pretty close to the bone for you?
Oh yeah, especially with I would say probably my two ex-girlfriends
Yeah.
that I really loved,
Mhm.
and I look back at it, and they still affect me till this day.
Mhm.
Uh,
That's how you close the book, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
they do. I think that I've forgiven myself. Obviously, if they were to see me today, they wouldn't recognize the man that I am.
Mhm.
Completely different man. But yeah, it was tough. I had to. I don't know, man. I just sort of cut it open, and
Mhm.
like I was just writing from the heart, and I didn't care what people thought of me. Actually, it was invigorating to just go, okay, here's what it is, and
Mhm.
then if you don't like it, then you can either put the book down or stop playing the audiobook. You
Mhm.
know, um, the only person that I cared about reading that book was probably, um, you know, my daughter Chloe, and and then there was a thing in there about my sister Cher, um, which I'm so proud of her today. She's got, I believe now, a year and a half clean off of her back medication. She was
Oh,
prescribed
fantastic.
some fentanyl.
Yeah.
And in the book, I wasn't able to, in time, the new version, the soft cover, we changed it, but that that bothered her, that I didn't, understand what at the time the significance of that.
Mhm.
But so Chloe, my two ex girlfriends, and my sister, and but other than that, everything turned out. Quite honestly, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know if I'd sell 100 copies. Like, nobody knows who I am. Like, this is social media. I've got, at the time I had 200 followers. I don't have any followers now, but
Mhm.
I didn't know what to expect. And within the first week, we hit number one.
Yeah. It's selling extremely well, as it should.
Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about as well, Mizey, is was it your idea to narrate the audio version yourself? That was a brilliant decision.
That
Uh,
that was Joe Rogan.
oh, really?
I'll tell you.
Do you know Joe Rogan?
No,
No.
but I'll tell you how it happened. So I was one after the book was written, and there was talk of the audio book being done. I was watching Joe Rogan on YouTube,
Okay.
and they were talking about somebody just wrote a book,
Hmm.
and Joe goes, "Did you do the audio book?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, who did it?" And the guy goes, "Well," he goes, "I did it." He goes, "Oh, thank God." He goes, I can't stand listening to autobiographies of somebody else's voice. And I thought, well, who the hell's doing mine, right? So I call my publisher and I go, who's doing my book? And he goes, oh, I got somebody already. They've been hired. They're professional. I said, well, no, man, I'd like to try. And they said, okay, here's the deal. What we'll do then is we're going to send you 3 pieces of your book that we want you to read. We want you to record it, and you send it back, and we'll let you know. So I did it, and I sent it back, and they came back and said, you know what, we're going to let you do it. And it was awesome. And the last thing about the audiobook is I had no idea the work that was going to go into that book. So when I went in for my first day of recording, I was there for, I believe, 6 or 7 hours. Every word had to match the book. So I had an iPad in front of me, and there was a producer in Toronto watching me. And then there was the producer in the studio. And if I messed up or my voice dropped, they would stop it and I'd have to do it again. And so the first day I left, I couldn't even talk. And I go, oh my God, I've got 8 more days to go. Like, I got 8 days. I can't do it. I can't. And I went in the next day and banged out 6 hours or whatever it was. And then, yeah, it was hard, but I'm really glad I'm really glad I did it.
Well, I think anybody who listened, I encourage people to get the audio version. Well, get both, get the written version and the audio version. I have both. But the audio version is just, it really hits home, like some of the stuff that's in the book. I agree with Joe Rogan. If anybody else were reading it, it just wouldn't have the same impact. Speaking of impact, this is the last question I want to ask you. For the people reading your book, I know you've said why you wrote it, and you didn't write it, to make money or do anything like that. But for the people reading your book, what would you want the reader? What would be the key thing or key things that you'd want people to take away from having experienced Painkiller?
Oh, I think, boy, that's a good question. I think that we have to first understand that we're human, and that, boy, oh boy, we're gonna experience things in life that at the moment feel like, or literally our lives are coming to an end, and it's the worst thing possible. And you couldn't think, like I write in the book, there was a moment where, when I was living on that couch and I was broke, that I couldn't envision ever having a visa again, let alone owning a home. Like, that just seemed so far. And lo and behold, that I had the faith to stick with what my belief system was that if I stay sober a day at a time, I know that my life's going to get better. I may not own a home, I may not get a visa, but my life is definitely going to be better than what it was. And it's funny how the universe works. When you put your head down and you believe in something and you go for it, how it finds a way to come back, and it rewards you in certain little ways. And the message is that no matter how bad things are and no matter how good things are in your life, it's always going to fluctuate, and you have to roll with the punches.
What a great message. I'm very grateful for the book, Brantt. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful work. I hope many people read it. One of the best things about it is it does completely dispel the myth, not only that hockey players are stupid, that tough guys are the dumbest ones of all. So you've just blown up 2 myths, which I really love. I love that almost as much as the book itself. So,
well, it's funny you mentioned that, because you know, when it came to the book, so I was trying to think of a cover, and um, what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to have my face associated with the book.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to have a hockey jersey associated with the book. Um, I wanted the book to speak for itself, and it was important that we came up with a cover that, when you walk by the bookshelf, you'd sort of go, "What's that? What's that all about?" And so, yeah, I don't know. And don't get me wrong, I loved some other books that I read. I thought Theo's was his
Mm-hmm.
first one that he did.
Yeah.
That was really the first hockey book I think that took people aback
Yeah.
and went, oh my God, that's the life of a hockey player that was making millions and going through his addiction. It was our first look at that type of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other books that you read that are basically hockey related, and they don't want to get too political, and they don't want to get too offside with their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of stuff you already knew,
Yeah.
and which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to take a different turn, and so I'm hoping that people will enjoy it.
You certainly took a different turn, and the cover is really cool.
Yeah.
The book is Painkiller, and we're at the part of our program we call the reading list, Brent. And I hope it doesn't shock you to learn that your book is our featured title today. It's
Oh,
called
nice.
Painkiller, a memoir of big league addiction, and it's a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And I could not recommend this book more, not only for sports fans and hockey fans, and hopefully we have a lot of those in our audience, but for anybody. It's a human story. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of survival. And I just think there's something there for everyone. The other book that I've chosen, and I'm going to ask you for another selection besides your own book if you want to offer one, is a book that you've probably read. I share your admiration for Bob Probert. He has had a book called Tough Guy.
Yeah.
And this is
write that book.
Yeah. No, he didn't.
No, Bobby didn't. I don't believe Bobby wrote that. I think that that book came out after he passed away.
Okay.
I think that it was he with Christy. She had the notes that were actually they also did for his documentary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I watched that too several times.
Yeah, so I could be wrong on that, but I believe that Bobby had already passed, I think, when that book was actually released.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's correct. It was it was published in October 25th, 2011, and my recollection is that he passed away a year earlier, right?
Yeah. So I think I'm right on that. Yeah.
But the description is, during a notorious career with the Detroit Red Wings and the Chicago Blackhawks, Bob Probert racked up points, penalty minutes, and bar bills, establishing himself as one of the most feared enforcers in the history of the NHL. On the ice, he was a fan favorite, backed up his teammates 100%, taking on the toughest guys of his era. Off the ice, Probert played hard too. Over his pro career, he went through 10 stays in rehab, 2 NHL suspensions, a jail sentence for carrying cocaine across the border, and a near fatal motorcycle crash. Fortunately, he had learned his lesson by the time he met up with you.
He landed on grass. I didn't land on grass.
But the reason why I turned to Bob Probert, for obvious reasons, but he was one of your hockey heroes, and and a friend of yours, and there's some really great stories in your book. Involving Probert, not only playing against him and that, but some of your, let's say, off ice escapades.
There's actually, when that book came out in 2011, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
So there's a story about in there that he writes about when the Blackhawks played the Sharks, and how the coach and me and Proby were buddies. We were working out and sort of rooming together, and the coach from the Blackhawks, Lauren Mulliken, actually said, "You better fucking go get that guy Myhres or whatever," right? And it was the first time, Proby said, in his career that a coach sent him out to fight somebody.
Really?
Yeah, and he didn't do it just in spite of that. And I remember reading that, going, "Wow, he mentioned my name in his book. That's so cool." Like I was just so proud of that because he was on, Gretzky for me was,
Oh yeah.
the Elvis, right?
Oh yeah.
But Proby was the Bon Jovi, and he was right there as far as the top guys go.
He was a very unique hockey. I can't think of any player right now who's like him. Like if you think of like 1988,
Yeah,
he's playing on that line with Steve Yzerman. He was in the All-Star game. Yeah, I mean he was one of the best players at his position in the NHL and the toughest guy in the NHL. I mean he was a tremendous hockey player.
If you look at his stats, the 1 year where I think he had close to 30 goals and he had 380 minutes in penalties. Like, could you imagine if somebody did that today?
There's nobody like him.
How much money they'd make?
There's nobody like him. Brantt Myhres came the closest. There's nobody like him.
Yeah,
Brantt Myhres is last year in Lethbridge, let's say.
In the bridge was the closest.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was, and it's, I think the reason why he was so loved is because of the man that he was, how good he was with the fans and with his teammates, and everybody loved Big Bob. It was just, Big Bob was Big Bob. And when I got to meet him, that first day I wrote about in the book where I was riding the bike, and I'm just sort of looking over going, I can't believe this. Like, this is crazy. And then the next thing you know, we're having dinner and going over to his place. And he was just like as I said, a big teddy bear that loved to have fun and didn't take life too seriously, and but man, he got him mad, like, look out.
That last story in the book about how he's trying to avoid detection.
Oh yeah.
That one is priceless. That is worth the price of the book.
That was such a wild night. Like I still can't believe that it happened. What I can't believe happened is we get there and they go, "Okay, Myhres, Proby, you guys are rooming together." And I looked at Bob. I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yep." And then Chris Nyland was in the next room with the door attached door, and all the piss cups were there waiting at 8 a.m. to get urine tested. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously I'm not touching anything tonight. And Big Bob was he was doing his own thing.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Well, Brantt, I want to thank you for being with us today, for taking the time. We're so grateful for it. I know people are going to love this interview and listen to you talk about your book. As I said, I can't say enough good things about your book. I'd say it's one of the top 3 hockey books I've ever read.
Thank you.
Strongly recommend it because it's not just, like you say, it's not just a hockey book. It's a human story. There's so much in there. There's something for everyone in there.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about it. And there's a naked honesty to it that is brutal. And it's so brutal sometimes, as I said earlier, it's hard to read. Like you're doing yourself.
I know. Even for me though, even for me, like, I think when it really hit me was they give you I don't know how many. I don't know if it was 100 author copies. I don't know. Anyways, I got all these copies and before it was released, and I was sitting there one night and I don't know what I was doing, but the book was in front of me, and I thought, I'm gonna pick it up and take a look at it. And the next thing you know, I started reading it, and it was the first time that I read my book in a book fashion, like where you sit down and you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And there was probably 10 parts of the book that I couldn't even get through.
Mm.
That were
not just me. Yeah.
I couldn't even get through them without crying or tearing up, because it was so emotional for me. And as I was writing it, I wasn't really I was just trying to be professional about it and all that. I wasn't really taking the time to let it sink in.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I grabbed it when I was alone, and I till this day, if I look at my book, I start to feel like I want to choke up.
Yeah.
It's so personal for me.
Yeah. No, I know there's a couple of parts there. For example, your when your conversation with your dad when he was near his passing, and the conversation with your mother, with your parents. Those were, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was feeling it right.
Yeah, right here. I know.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
It was tough.
So, Brent, I've asked a lot of you. I'm going to ask one more thing of you, if
Sure.
you wouldn't mind, and that is, I would be so grateful if sometime you drop by and sign my copy of your book when you're.
I tried to yesterday.
I know. Well,
I tried to yesterday, buddy.
Well,
of course I will. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Yeah, please drop by, because I'd love to shake your hand, and I'm so grateful that you accepted our invitation to be here. I've just loved talking with you, almost as much as I enjoyed your book. Actually, more. I enjoyed talking to you even more than reading the book.
Right on.
I wish you every success with it, continued success with it, and also with everything else that you're doing in your life. I know that you've kind of dedicated your life to your daughter and helping other people and educating people about addictions. And I also know, we didn't talk about it, but I know that you were involved in an academy for Indigenous youth. I'd love to chat with you about that sometime.
Yeah.
Because we have that in common as well.
Yes.
So I'd love to talk with you more. Maybe we could have lunch sometime. But I'm so grateful for you for being here with us on Gray Matter. People are just going to love this interview, I think.
Yeah. Well, I saw your fire pit out in the back, so we'll sit by the fire. I'll have a non-alcoholic beer, and we'll
Yes. Yes, that would be best, because I don't own a motorcycle and I don't want you to hear it.
I just rent them now. I get insurance.
Great. Again, thanks so much for being with us on being our special guest today on Gray Matter. Brent, it's been an absolute pleasure.
You betcha. Thanks, guys.
Okay.